Gonna just in the essence of staying on time, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next presentation. I know that a lot of you are still in line. Go ahead, keep going, eating, visiting very quietly, just out of courteousness. I'd like to introduce the Maude family. And if you haven't heard about the Maude case, you're fixing to hear about it. What a surprise and a gift and a curse and a blessing and everything emotion that can run in between for the last year for the Maudes. If you don't know, Charles and Heather Maude were charged by the U.S. Forest Service on individual felony indictments of theft of government property over simply what was basically just a fence line off of the survey. And these people have went through hell, and I kind of get what they've done, and I kind of admire. I don't kind of admire them. I really admire them. But my family went through the same thing in 1999 in Colorado, and so it was an honor for me to be able to be a part of this story. The greatest thing that I got out of this was a friendship. I guess it was Brett Kinsey and Carrie Stadheim and Eric Groper that called and said, we've got to be a part of this. We've got to help these people on the very grassroots, ground level, at least fight. I wasn't sure what we could do at RCAF legally. I'm just a rancher, so but I had this experience from 1999 that was very likening to what they were going through. And so the more I talked to the Maudes, the more I trusted them, and really we created a great friendship. They're the owners of Maude Hog and Cattle. I'm going to let them tell their own story of what they've been through, who they are. Got the greatest little kids, Lyle and Kennedy. I'm very, very honored to know them, and I'm very honored that they're here today. You should be too, because this is a fight we've been fighting at RCAF for many, many years. The importance of property rights and getting that national recognition of how important that is. You guys, please welcome Charles and Heather, Lyle and Kennedy Maude. They're going to tell us their story right here on the RCAF stage. Give them a warm welcome.
My name is Lyle Maude.
My name is Kennedy Maude.
My name is Heather Maude. Give us a second.
Test. I'm Charles Maude. And I guess I get to be the first one to start on this. It's been a kind of a ride for the last year, 18 months. And I'm waiting for some slides to show up for us. I'll just start in. We just thank you all for all your support. And financially, mentally, spiritually, we have relied on all of you to pull through all this. And it's just some of the people we know, some of the people we call friends and family, others we will never know. And that's been real touching to our family and helped us a lot. So I guess we'll just kind of start with some background. Some of you may know this, some of you may not, and but we'll just kind of catch you up. Back in 1907, my family came from eastern South Dakota back out to eastern Custer County, western Pennington County. We're on the Cheyenne River down there. Some of my great grandpa's aunts came out and settled a homestead off the west side or the northeast corner of Z-Bell Table, which is now all federally owned land. That drug my great-grandpa out here, I presume, was the reason, and his dad. They decided they'd purchase some land on the river, and that happened in about 1910. And that piece of land is that's what the scrap has been over for the last year, is that chunk of land lays in a sea all the way around.
Next slide. There you go.
So I'm not real good at speaking, but I'm going to do my best here, everyone. But this piece of ground right here is our privately held land. The land in orange is the discrepancy land. The discrepancy land is 2 river lots that lay from the measured border to the old river channel that was this river in 1888, 89 when the survey was done on the county. Current day river runs clear out here and cuts back like this. So in 100 years, the river has moved almost a quarter mile east. And for me, I don't know any different. But when we start looking into land ownership and whatnot, we're there in Pennington and Custer County. This particular piece of land runs full length of both counties, and it's no man's land. Virtually no one knows who owns it. So that piece of land actually cuts off these 2 river lots right here from the federal government's land. And so my family has always used this land from the beginning. We were there before they were. My great-grandpa's house sat right here. He raised his family there in the 20s and on into the 30s. He was there in the 40s and the 50s. He left in 1953. My grandpa took over, or 1963, I guess. My grandpa took over, and he owned that land. He owned it until 2002 when I purchased it from him. But it's always been irrigated. It's always been farmed. We've tilled it. We've put hay on it. We've grazed it. We've used it as our own. In 1940, we think, late 1940s, because of the way my great-grandpa managed this, he flood irrigated all these bottoms, treated them as his own. So back in 1940, late 1940s, there's a berm that goes right up along here. The reason he put that in there because the river water was wanting to erode the land away, and he needed to keep his irrigation water in so it would soak into the sand. So he put this berm in, and then later, in the late 1940s, he came along and built a fence on it to keep it up out of the river's way and out of his floodway. So to current day, that fence is still there. And that's the fence that we have had this argument over for the last year. So on the other side of this fence, in this piece of land right here, and to the south, west, and way far south, there's 700 and some acres of federal land. And that's what we call our allotment. We use it in the wintertime. This piece of land right here is completely dry. It does not have water on it in the wintertime because the river freezes. So when we use this piece of land, we turn them back to a big spring right here. So this piece of land, no matter what side of the fence you're standing on, gets used at the same time. The only thing we do different is we cultivate our side, sometimes raise corn, alfalfa, whatever we think is necessary for our operation. So going back, our family has pretty much built that is our feed base, that irrigated land. It's only, we started out with 118 acres. The river stole a lot from us over the years. And we're down to now, the pivot covers 55 acres, sorry. We have a water right that to water 118 acres there. That goes back to, we were senior water right holders, so it was prior to 1960. So we've always raised feed on that, irrigated, dry land, whatever we saw fit. So come to March of last year, you know, through the generations we've known this this sliver of federal land lays there. And we've just never understood why it was such a big deal in the last year, because we have another slide, the other picture.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
Okay, that isn't what I wanted,
Next.
but
That one work? There you go.
so there's the fence. There's the fence, if ever on the berm. But going back to that map, if somebody would roll back for me. Down to the south, at the south end of the meadow, off across the river right here, is approximately 19 acres that is fenced into the federal government that they manage. We no longer manage it. We manage it along with our permit. But we own it. And this is roughly 25 acres right here that the discrepancy is over. So we are, in my mind, we have always just kind of had a grandfathered in type of agreement that back and forth. And nothing has ever been said in my ownership time since 2002. So coming back to the last year, in March 29th of last year, Travis Lunders, federal special agent for the Forest Service, and his tag-along guys, Summers, came to our house day before Good Friday, or it was Good Friday, and wanted to visit about this issue that he had found. Well, through the last year, we have figured out that he had spent some serious time down there looking around on or off private land. It didn't matter to him. He went where he wanted to go. So that day on March 29th, he commented about our spring we have here, how cool that was, and how the center pivot was, and one thing or another. That led us to believe that he had spent lots of time there. Come to find out, when later on, that there was up on the west side of this property, there's a giant ravine that we come down. It's the only kind of way in there. It's a road we have built into this draw, half owned by private land and half on federal land. So at the top of that, my grandpa in 1993 fenced out the federal land off his private land because he was tired of them managing all his private land for him. So anyways, at the top of this, there's a gate, and at that gate there had always been a trespass sign, no trespass sign, because we didn't want the individuals to come down there, the public users, and get stuck, go down on our river bottom, tear up stuff, whatever. A lot of times, if it rains, you don't get out. So anyways, we put that trespassing sign up there. Well, I didn't. Grandpa did, long time ago, when he put the fence up in the 90s, to keep people from entering into a situation that wasn't good for them, honestly. So anyways, a deer hunter supposedly, we don't know that still to this day, and I don't know if we'll ever know, complained about that sign being at the top of that hill. That is what spurred Lunders to start looking into this situation. Well, he looked at the map and found out that we had these 25 acres that we were farming of the federal government's, and we had been forever, but he didn't know that. He claimed that we had changed the fence and made that all part of our land when we put the pivot in 2020. So that was where the argument started. He suggested that day, we really didn't do much. We acted pretty stupid. Kind of took some pretty good notes. And that launched us into talking to Julie Wheeler, which was our district range lady out of the Hot Springs office. And of course, he was there that day on May 1st. And we went over our yearly allotment that day, signed the papers and whatnot. It was no big deal. That was a scheduled deal. Then he brought up that we'd had an email with FSA back in 2020 when we put the center pivot in. The lady that I was working with at the time at the FSA, her and I was trying to figure out a way to get the pipeline so we could directly come from the river into the center without a lot of effort. Well, when we got all said and done, I couldn't do it because it was crossing federal land. And I admitted to her on that email that I can't do that, what she wanted me to do, because there was federal land involved. Digging up federal land, whatnot, we were going to have to go through a lot of paperwork to get that done. So we brought the water in from the south, all on private land, so we didn't have to worry about it. And it became a non-issue at that point. At that time, we were looking at trying to put funding together for the center pivot through the FSA. We decided as we went on that wasn't a good option for us, so we went to private
Funding.
ownership or banking and financed it. So anyways, FSA had nothing to say about it after that day. But they were going to use that FSA email that he had went and researched between March 29th and May 1st against us, and I guarantee you that's why he thought he had the power to indict us, was all that one email. So at that meeting we decided, we decided, Heather and I brought that, what about a trade or a purchase or a special use permit? Special use permits are like for this purpose, year in, year out, you can sign a special use permit. Nothing was decided that day. They said they'd look into it, get back to us. On May 6th, they showed up with a survey crew. May 6th and 7th, staked out across our hay barley field that we had planted at the time, told us to stay on our side of the fence from there on. Our side of the line. There wasn't a fence, I guess, there. But so then that kind of, we didn't know how to handle that after that point, because first of all, the survey crew was done by the survey crew was Forest Service, was not BLM, wasn't an official survey at that point. It was just finding where we were. And so kicked the can down the road. We kind of worked back and forth. Some of it with, we didn't like where it was going, so Mike Rounds was kind of drug into it. His guy, Jim Selcher, there in the Rapid office, came and looked at it. We just didn't like how we were being treated a little bit, and the hostility from the Forest Service, and especially Mr. Lunders himself. So we were working on trying to figure out a resolution, possibly having Rounds run it through Congress if we had to, go down that road. June 24th, I got a call about noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was from Travis. He was going to come out and give us some paperwork. So I told him, well, it's probably the easiest. I'm at home. Just come to my house. I'll be waiting for you. Well, when it was all said and done with, I was by myself, so my wife, she called one of my neighbors and had him come and back me up, because we were told by many, and some of you in this room, to never be alone with an officer. So anyhow, I went ahead and accepted his papers, and it was the indictment that he was indicting Heather and I separately for the theft of government property. And I think we have it. Kind of roll through some stuff.
Right
there it is, right there. Takes a little bit to read.
That's what he sent me that day.
So when our attorneys eventually started looking at this, they were a little worried that this is a fill-in-the-blank indictment, that it was very easy to be used for us as well as our neighbors, and it could be used across agencies. It wasn't necessarily Forest Service, it wasn't necessarily the wildlife, or anything like that. It was going to be easily used across the board. So then, that kind of scared us, scared our neighbors. We worked a lot with Van Ellsberg at that point, trying to well, we'd kind of been working with Van Ellsberg for the last month before this, just trying to gather up, because he was an old Forest Service guy that had retired and went back to help people like us with issues, and we were trying to reach out to him to figure out a route to solve this. And one of his biggest things that he said at the time, he says, I think the only reason you are in the place you are in is because common sense has left the room. And I think the room is still vacant from common sense. And it took Secretary Rollins and to put some back in. But so after the indictment, we had to find lawyers. Lawyers are nearly impossible to find in western South Dakota. We found one that came recommended by, who recommended?
A family friend that's also an attorney but doesn't practice that kind of law.
Yep. In Pierre, that was for Heather. We thought my court-appointed attorney was probably good enough to get us through the indictment day. Gave him everything we had for fall cows that we sold in Fort Pierre to pay for hers. So we had at least one lawyer. The court-appointed lawyer, I was able, she was good. She did explain what was going on in the process and whatnot when we went through the indictment hearing. I had never heard of or talked to her before the day we showed up. She literally showed up to help me that day, and that was it. So prior to that, we had to do some custody work for our kids. It probably took us a week, right around the 4th of July, to get custody all wrote up, and someone to take our custody of our kids, because they could retain us on the hearing day. Come to find out later on, we didn't have a record, so it was going to be really tough for them to keep us. The most either one of us has ever done is a speeding ticket.
That was me, not him.
So it became really impossible for the court to really keep us, but we didn't know that at the time. And our lawyers were so vague on what this process amounted to. So we had to go through bail interviews. That was like a 2 or 3 day on and off thing with the nicest ladies you've ever been on the phone with. And they needed to know what we were worth, where our parents were, where our siblings were located, what their names was. They were looking at whether we were a flight risk, is a lot of it. And so we made it through that, went to the hearing at the courthouse in Rapid. We did have several people in support of us there, filled the room that day already, and people said you never see that. And so we got through that. We were able to go home. They didn't keep us. And that was on July 8th of last year. And I guess I'll just kind of turn it over to Heather, and she's going to take the last half and kind of fill you in on where we're at today.
So after we got through our indictment hearing at the court, we sat down before and after that as a family and discussed this. We're a Christian family, and we discussed with our children the fact that we aren't guaranteed an easy life and that bad things happen, right? And we also had to have the conversation of what do we decide to do. And as a family, we agreed that we had done no wrong. And as the wife and the mother, I got to walk across the field with him after they surveyed and they put T-posts in and rocks across the field he had planted. Very much a part of him. I'm sure a lot of you can understand that in this, industry that we're in. So I got to be the woman that walked across the field they'd driven over and driven T-posts down and stacked rocks around. And then they indicted us separately. So they went after Charles's family legacy, and then they went after our legacy and attempted to separate us from our children until they were grown. and destroy this family legacy. And there is not a word that I have come up with to describe what that does to you as a wife and a mother. Very motivating. And we decided that we had done no wrong and that we would stand up and push back against this, and that there was no way that they were simply going to steamroll us. And so we had that discussion, made that decision as a family, and I sat down and fought the government for the last year, and Charles went outside and kept our operation going without one of the two key people that work it every day for the last year. Shortly after our indictment hearing, I got a call from Brett Kinsey, and he asked if he and Eric Groper could stop by. And we couldn't talk about the case. The court put conditions on us that we couldn't discuss the case. They revoked our firearms. But my father-in-law happened to be there that day, and we just so happened to be at the allotment. And so Brett and Eric stopped by, and that was invaluable. I think the biggest thing is they took one look at it, and they said, this is absolutely crazy, and you're right, you haven't done anything wrong. And both the federal government and the criminal court system are very good at making you feel borderline insane and very guilty until you prove yourself innocent. So that really bolstered us up mentally to have two people in our industry stop by and just take a look at it and say, you are seeing this correctly. I remember Brett saying, I don't see how you don't come out on top and fight. And so we did. We worked really hard on gathering our family history. And it also was very apparent very early on that God meant for us to walk through this, and he made that apparent and gave me a very deep sense of peace that we were going to come out of this victorious. And that was hard also because he didn't give Charles that sense of peace. But he gave us these signs. One is that the Maudes are very good at maintaining family records. And by that I mean Charles' grandpa had a shoebox for every year of his life with every piece of paper from that year. And guess who married into the Maude family and got to go through that? And I just happened to keep anything from a bank, and his grandfather kept those records of what he grew each year and his yields, and then I happened to keep any envelope that came from a government agency. And 12 years later, I went out to this box that I had compiled and gathered up more data and information than anyone has ever seen within the congressional realm. They told us that nobody has these records, and we had them all. And we were able to build this multi-generational relationship we had with this organization with zero issues. And they also took photos, and if we could go to the old photos, we have a photo, several, that one please. This is very near or on the line. It has a date on the bottom that I inadvertently cropped out, but it says 1913 thrashing alfalfa. Does anybody know what alfalfa is? It's a cultivated crop. And they had boxes of these. So we have compiled these into 3-ring notebooks. And we just continued to work on this and answer questions. We were sending a bunch of information up to Secretary Rollins, this type of information, after she was appointed Secretary of Agriculture, and this just went on and on every day. Self-educated ourselves on the laws, recognized that we've been there so long that we have pre-existing rights, and you need to go back to the laws in effect at the time that those rights were established, and you tell that to a criminal attorney and his eyes will cross. So we did just a lot of self-educating on that as well. And this went on until April of 2025. And a lot happened in April of 2025. The media picked it up, and it had grown. But in March and April, we had, and I need to back up. The other thing that Brett and Eric told me to do is to call Shad Sullivan. And we did. And Shad came on board. He mentioned his family's faced something similar, which is incredibly unfortunate, but has given him a great education that enables him to help others in ways that if you haven't gone through something like this, you just do not understand. He came on board and worked really hard and gathered up and gained a lot of media attention for us. And a lot of other people came on board too in April. Our representative Liz May brought a group of South Dakota legislators out, and they toured it, and she organized it. Our parents hosted along with our children, and our neighbors stood up throughout all of this and backed us, And we're at that event also to answer questions and discuss who we were and the fact that this had been there. So it grew because I'm guessing all of you in this room understand how, you can imagine exactly what this would be like. And on April 7th, 9th, and 10th, Lunders led a 4-person U.S. Forest Service crew resurveying. We have yet to see any of the results of either survey, but the Forest Service did tell us he was removed from the area to help de-escalate the situation, and that is untrue. And so there are ongoing frustrations on that front. But on April 23rd, we had hundreds of people that we were suggested to call because they are an expert on this or they know about that. But Tyler Robertson, who is Tiff's husband, called and said, a friend of ours that builds fence is building fence for this guy. His name is Brett Tolman, and you need to call him. And so I did, and he didn't answer. And I tried him again a week later, and he didn't answer. But on April 23rd, he called me back, and he told me who he was. And he said, I just have a couple questions, Heather. Was the fence built in your lifetime? And I said, no, it was not. And he goes, so am I reading this that we have some individual issues in combination with the usual government BS? And I said, well, I can't speak about it, but I'd say that's fairly accurate. He called back 2 more times that day. And in that I said, we've been sending a lot of information to Secretary Rollins. And he said, really, we are friends. And I said, really? That is great. And so he reached out to her and he called back and he goes, yep, you are right. She has received all of this information. We sent that primarily through Representative Hageman. And she had received it. She had been reviewing it. So that's part of why this is going to go really fast right here, is that she was aware of this. And then when a person she knew came on to represent us, it went fast. And God was involved in that as well. So that was on April 23rd. On April 25th, we were supposed to brand, and we got rained out. That was a Friday. He called and told us that all the charges were dropped, but to let it come down through the court system. We might go to D.C. And I said, okay. I said, well, I want to tell my mom and my mother-in-law. And he said, yes, you can. And I said, well, that's good. So we branded April 26th. And on the 27th, we're sitting there, with that post-branding cup of coffee, fairly dazed and confused. And he texts me and says, do you have your trip booked to D.C.? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, get it booked. So that was Sunday, April 27th. We booked that trip that day. We planned to be gone the next day. We flew out April 29th. Found out they were trying to bring civil charges against us, the U.S. Attorney for the Federal Court District of South Dakota. Still potentially are. That was a big deal to us. We are not court experts, and we felt like maybe we had just moved from Court A to Court B at the same tournament. April 30th, on the way to the press conference, we were a wreck, and Brett said, I don't know that the two of you understand what you've done. And we said, why don't you enlighten us? And he said, only 5% of criminal cases are ever dismissed. Of the 95% that are prosecuted, 75% go to jail. And he said, I don't care how beautifully it was worded to you, they were trying to destroy your legacy and they were trying to throw you in jail. And what you have just done is almost impossible. And just thanks to the Lord and the gifts and strengths he put in us and all of the people that he brought along in all these incredible positions, we got to that day. Rolled up to the USDA building. Brooke Rollins rolled up with her motorcade, jumped out, ran over, introduced herself to us, had her Secret Service fairly worked up, and we all walked in, and we were able to meet some of the people who had been involved, and we went out and did that press conference, and spent a couple days in D.C. and came home. And so then what everybody always wants to know is, where are you at now? And so this whole conference, you guys, we have all been learning a lot about the issues that we face, many of them unnecessarily. And what we have just accomplished is we have overcome the unnecessary issue that we faced, which was a completely unwarranted criminal felony charge against us. And we are now back to where we were on May 1st of 2024, which is resolve it. And how do we resolve it? And we have submitted a proposed resolution to Secretary Rollins. She has acknowledged she has received that, and we are now waiting to see what her response is. But she is actively engaged and working directly with us through Brett Tolman to get this resolved. We are not operating on the land. When you're in the middle of resolving a land issue with the federal government, it is very strongly suggested you do not operate on the land. So it is sitting there for the second year vacant. Our feed base is. We did make our second pivot payment without it raising anything this April. And we are just, at this point, working through that process directly with her. Optimistic, cautiously optimistic. But back to, we want to thank our entire industry for recognizing this for what it was, for utilizing all your God-given gifts and talents to stand up for us, to support us, and to back us. And just as we wrap up, we had a few things that we thought of that we would like to share with people. And one is that in ag, we have this mentality that we can take care of it on our own, but there are things that you need to share with your neighbors, and what is going on with government agencies is one of those. Because we got targeted on this, but I will tell you there are a lot of situations exactly like ours on the same river. And your neighbors are gonna be the people who are next if you fall, and they're gonna be the people most posed and prepared to stand up for you when you face something. And ours are a tremendous example of that. You also just need to educate each other when you are singled out. What did they do? How did they do it? It's a crowd mentality. And we don't have a big crowd, but we are a strong crowd when we do come together. You should always hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Document. I was a journalist before we got married, and that served me very well in all of this. And we did a great deal of documentation, and it may not be that comfortable, but you can record your meetings with federal agencies, and that's pretty hard to dispute. And also do as much written communication as possible. Emails are great, phone calls, not so much. If you need an attorney, you probably need to find one who believes in it so much that they're gonna do it pro bono. I don't know if that's the case in every instance, but the attorneys who did the least in this situation were the two that we paid hourly. Compliance is acceptance, and we did not comply. And there are ways, and the good Lord again has given us all a series of strengths and talents and gifts. And you have watched him work through us and a great many people. We know this last year, and we hope and pray that this now sets a precedent that so many others in this room can continue to build upon in a positive direction, which is a rare thing for us. We all know that. But you guys can build upon this now in ways that we haven't, and we would encourage you to do that, and we would offer our help in whatever way we can. Do you have anything else? And I don't know if the red means I went over or if we have 9 minutes for questions.
Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. The microphone's on its way, hold on.
Yeah, I've got a couple of quick questions. I'm Scott Edoff, the Maude's neighbor, and I would like them to kind of explain a little bit. The thing that I found really ironic in this whole deal was back in the 40s, the Forest Service, they've got a document that the Forest Service gave Charles's great-grandpa the right to dig a irrigation ditch 1 mile across Forest Service property to irrigate this property. They dug a irrigation ditch 1 mile across the Forest Service's property to get water to the Maude's property to irrigate it. And that was in the 40s. The other thing I want to touch on is these people have done something that this whole crowd I don't think really realizes. They have done something that nobody in this world or America has done. They got a letter from the South Dakota Stock Growers, RCAF, NCBA, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, South Dakota Public Lands, and 100 other ones. They all were in favor of the mods. Now you tell me where any of those groups have ever agreed on one thing in the history of our industry, these people done it. And thank you.
Thank you all for your time, and thank you to all of you who supported us throughout this whole ordeal. And we would just appreciate your continued support and prayers as we work through where we should have been a year ago. And we will keep you posted.